Celsius stock is collapsing today, down at one point around 20%. Investors are wondering, is this potentially a bargain? Is this potentially an opportunity? In full disclosure, I actually do own shares in Celsius. CELH is the ticker. I called it out to my Unrivaled Investing subscribers at the end of last year. Stock's up over 50% since then. And so I want to do a quick refresh because anytime you see a stock down, let's say, shy of 20% in a day, it's volatile. I think it's recovered a little bit of that since then. It does cause investors to wonder, like, okay, is the thesis busted? Is this the beginning of a greater collapse? If you enjoy educational investment videos, please make a point of hitting that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. So what's causing the stock to drop? So you do see some sensational headlines. Chattanooga man credits UAB doctors for saving his liver. After energy drink sends him to the hospital, it dives into how I was drinking one in the morning before I go to work, and I was drinking one in the afternoon, and we came to the conclusion that it's potentially the green tea extract in the Celsius drinks. This is the patient. I was told that the ingredients could have cost him his life. I was told my case was very severe, and I was in acute liver failure. So that you read that type of headline, and it's very natural to go like, oh my gosh, I do not want to own this. Like, this is too risky. This is maybe this is like a Chipotle type of moment where it's like you see a bunch of people getting food poisoning, maybe even dying, and you're like, oh, what? It's not worth it to own a consumer products company like that. And so, you have this dynamic. And then you also need to listen to the full story, and as the news reporter mentioned, this is, I'd argue, borderline Darwin Award type of potential here, maybe a contender, where he goes, those who use it, this is a direct quote from the news reporter, those who use it typically drink it because they need a boost throughout the day. Well, on the side of the can, it says to not drink more than 2 servings per day. And Shay Cox did not follow these directions. So he was drinking multiple Celsius drinks a day, even though it says very clearly, do not do so. Now, whenever, it's sort of like the hyper energetic folks that are like, yeah, I'm going to go drink like a whole bucket full of Red Bull. And then I'm going to be like, oh my God, why is my heart giving out? You need to think about your life choices, man. Personally, or as my mom would love to say, and her mom before her, everything in moderation. Maybe not everything, but I think you get the point, which is that for something like this, for an energy booster, don't start replacing it for water. For some people, they enjoy Celsius because it gives them a boost before working out. It is a relatively cheaper alternative in terms of caffeine intake than, let's say, doing something like Starbucks. And so maybe you have consumers switching from saying, hey, I need to have my morning Frappuccino from Starbucks. So you're going to save a little bit of money picking up that can. It doesn't have the like, oh, it's a nice warm beverage sensation. Oh, it's a fruity, potentially cold can. So it's cheaper, probably a better, in terms of caffeine intake, maybe a little bit more. But you also have I'd argue, healthier, not saying it's healthy, alternative to something like a Frappuccino or Red Bull, where it's like the equivalent of eating a Snickers bar and saying, hey, hurrah, I'm getting my caffeine. Why not just enjoy the Snickers? As opposed to, whereas here, you oftentimes with Celsius, you oftentimes have a much more healthy alternative with, 0 or low calorie count. So that's the first story that's causing the stock to drop lower. The second story causing the stock to drop lower is about an analyst's caution on sales. They're talking about a Morgan Stanley analyst, Dara Mohsenian, noted that Celsius sales growth slowed sequentially to around a 40% pace. He's talking about the Nielsen data, talking about potentially the market share dipping to around 10.5% from 10.8%, saying effectively they're losing market share. So growth is decelerating. They're losing market share. This is based on a sell side report from this. The quick reaction to this is, does this make sense? Thinking about like 39% growth. And so quickly, I turned to AI Ticker Chat. We have this new stock scanner for our premium users. where you can ask a question like, hey, let's find stocks that are clearly taking market share. I want to find growth, let's say growing faster than 30% in the most recent quarter. I want it profitable, maybe under $20 billion, $25 billion market cap. I want to find, let's say less competitive stocks in terms of, it's not a $1 trillion company where everyone and their mother knows about it, maybe a smaller company. And that's the dog in the background. The company that we're talking about, here it is running this scanner, looking for companies that definitely win market share or have historically won market share. And it calls out Celsius, CELH. And that is, it nails it, saying, look, this is a company that fits under that $25 billion market cap. They have nice profit margins that have been rapidly expanding, growing at over 30% in the most recent quarter. And if you look at management's commentary, they've made it very clear that they not only are winning market share, but expect to continue to do so. And let's actually just look at the results. Here's the retail sales of Celsius across channels. Here's the growth rate in the energy category driven by Celsius. So management says, look, in the most recent quarter, 47% of the growth in the energy drink category is driven by Celsius. You could see retail sales of Celsius has gone from effectively $100 million a few years ago to, a couple $1 billion in terms of US retail sales in terms of Celsius. That is not a company that's losing market share in my mind. That chart does not point that way. So once again, using AI ticker chat to look at the individual details, and it pulls into these transcripts, talking about, if you just see what management had to say from a few quarters ago, it talked about how they have a 17% market share in South Florida. Now we're up to 24%. They're targeting certain markets where they effectively punch above their weight, punch above their national average. These markets include South Florida, Tampa, New England, Dallas, Los Angeles. Then we picked up New York somewhere along the way. And so they're talking about they're winning market share, nearly a quarter of South Florida in terms of the energy beverage drink, market going to Celsius. Then more recently, during the first quarter, this is from their press release, I believe. Actually, no, this was the transcript talking about how Celsius alone responsible for that 47% growth. I already mentioned that. It's a full point in terms of market share, full point higher than the fourth quarter. So sequential growth of 1% in terms of market share, 4 points higher on a year-over-year basis. This is really strong, especially after growing at triple digits for the past 3 consecutive years. So I look at this and I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't make any sense to say like, oh, sell side report, there's no actual reported quarterly sales that would support this. But maybe in 1 week in May, maybe they lost some market share. Doesn't really make sense. It certainly doesn't drive the sort of drop I'm seeing today. So I think there's a third component to it, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But overall, looking at Celsius, I'm very pleased with their execution, their growth. Part of the reason why I bought them and when I called them out to my subscribers at Unrivaled Investing was because they have this new partnership where they're effectively partnering with Pepsi to roll out their exposure to not only US, but also looking at international exposure. And when you have a partner with Pepsi, and honestly, when I looked at management at Celsius, I was a little like, I'm not really sure this is the management team that gets you to this next behemoth. But when I see the partnership with Pepsi, I think, one, you have this sort of equity stake. I think it's preferred stock stake that, they're aligned to make sure there's no funny business going on. And two, they're seeing the actual sales results saying, hey, this is clearly selling. We want to have some sort of equity ownership in this. So that alignment in both being a distributor and partner was sort of what sealed the deal for me to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to pull the trigger myself. And that's when I called it out back closer to $50 a share to my subscribers last year. So what about the valuation for Celsius? And I think this is the part. This is that third component. One is the sensational headlines. I don't think that's really what caused the stock to drop. The second aspect is the sell side saying maybe you're losing market share, when all the relevant, I'd say, historic data says no, that's really not the case. Like you're probably over extrapolating 1 week, or you're missing a bigger picture. The reason why they're winning market share is it is relatively healthier than, let's say, doing, a bunch of Red Bulls. And it's generally more affordable than comparable energy drinks. And it's certainly healthier than, let's say, and cheaper than, let's say, going to Starbucks and saying, hey, I want my supersized Frappuccino. So you have these dynamics at play, and then you have the partnership and you have international. That's why it's been growing like crazy. And international is just beginning. Very small part of their business. So why is this third component is the valuation, where you have this concern of, wait a second, if they don't have, sales execution in the future, oh my gosh, how bad could it be? And so let's talk about the valuation in one quick sec. First of all, in full disclosure, this is not financial advice. And I do own shares in Celsius, as I already mentioned. CELH is the ticker. Also, quick plug, earlier this month, Robin, a premium member of the Unrivaled Investing community, he commented that I'm an extremely happy customer of Unrivaled Investing. The information and services you provide to me are invaluable. That's a direct quote. This follows another subscriber posting on how I'm currently ahead of my investing goals to retire at age 45 thanks to Unrivaled Investing. I am raising the rates for the premium tier later this month. So now is the time to lock in the most favorable pricing you will get for Unrivaled Investing right now by the end of this month. So thinking about Celsius, thinking about valuation, looking at the bigger picture, I don't like to see a lot of selling. I just did a video on insider buying. Those are the stocks. I want alignment. I want it where, I'm not buying shares and the CEO is like, or insiders are dumping millions of dollars. So when I see huge insider dumping, it makes it harder for me to be, say, oh, I want to aggressively buy. So it's important to recognize that. So that's why I call out, my subscribers to see my portfolio in terms of the percentage allocation. Celsius is not, let's say, a top 5 position, and it's exponential in terms of position sizing. And so it's a smaller, it's a smaller position. Because this dynamic. Now I do like to see the Pepsi alignment. Don't like to see this insider selling. That makes me less comfortable, because that means, well, wait a second, do you not believe in the vision? That said, this is the story of Celsius by hard numbers, not speculation, not sensational stories. This is the story, and you can actually see this. These figures are completely available for free at AI Ticker Chat, and this is the quarterly sales graph. And you can see, this is just incredible what they've done. And now it's around $300-400 million in quarterly revenue. The question is, can this be a couple $1 billion in quarterly revenue like you see with a competitor, Monster Beverage, in the future? I suspect it could. We'll see, though. That is going to be what drives the story from here for Celsius. And this is the part that makes me more confident. This is the part from their first quarter earnings that I liked a lot, which was that, yes, revenue growth in the first quarter disappointed investors. Only grew at 37%. There was a lot of inventory movements within their largest distributor, which represents over 60% of their sales. Okay, so you have large customers, wholesale customers, effectively, that, these distributors that it's going to cause volatility. Maybe they say, hey, we built up our inventory, we want to work down our inventory. But you want to look through the end sales, the retail sales. And the retail sales grew by 70%. And depending on what period you're looking at, it's somewhere between 50% and 70%. So yeah, because of inventory changes with one of their customers, it only grew 37%. So that was a disappointment. The end market's actually, for Celsius, growing 50 to 70%. So that is quite interesting. International sales, once again, teeny tiny, growing over 40%. So I would argue their results are stronger than they reported because the end market is growing faster. The retail market is growing faster than their wholesale customers. And so that is a key aspect that makes me like the thesis or like the story, that the end demand is still there. When I think about the valuation of Celsius and where can it go in the years ahead, this is the part that's a little bit trickier, because at the end of the day, let me summarize this. If you look at a bunch of figures and your eyes start popping out of your head and you're like, I don't get it, what's Daniel trying to say? What I'm trying to say here is their historic execution is incredible. They clearly have a product that is resonating with consumers. when you can find some sort of gravy train like that, if it just keeps on going, you have the potential for hundreds or thousands % upside. That's the big question of do you have that potential to keep executing and delivering? There will always be quarterly volatility. There will always be noise that'll make you say, oh, gravy train is over. Story's done. Now, who knows how the story's going to play out? So far, I'd argue I'm not seeing that with the data. I'll take it one quarter at a time. I'll look at the fundamentals and say, hey, what's the end market doing? What are your actual sales doing? What are your profits doing? What are your partnerships doing? I'll look at each of these components and say, hey, has the story fundamentally changed? I'd argue so far the story looks quite strong. The underlying fundamentals look quite strong. Is the valuation cheap? No, it's not. And that is the reason why you get this volatility, is you see the stock price, you will see stock price movement like this. When folks are like, ooh, if execution isn't perfect, what does that mean for the stock price? Because the valuation, I'd argue, is closer to full. Now, if you, and this is a framework, this is a hypothetical framework, stock price can go way higher, way lower. The key point, though, is that if they have incredible and very solid execution, let's say 50% growth this year, 25% growth in the years ahead, 35% profit margins. Management is targeted, 30% plus, talking about Monster as a comp. Then you are talking about a stock that has the potential to go over 100% upside. Depends on the execution of the business. But if for any reason their execution stinks and their growth decelerates to, let's say, 15% growth, and let's say only a 30 times multiple, then the stock goes nowhere for years. And so that's where, this is the reason why I'd argue it's not a supersized position for me personally, is I'd rather have something where it's asymmetric, where like on the downside, I still make 50%, and on the upside, I make several 100%. But depending on Celsius execution, it could work very well in the future. But it just depends on numerous factors. And it also depends on how does the public react to these stories. You do have a sort of a feedback element, like, oh my gosh, this is poison. Like, I'm not going to drink anymore. Like, full disclosure, I don't drink Celsius. Like, if I practically like look at a can of Celsius, I'll get like heart palpitations, like, oh my God, this is it. So like, I'm super sensitive to like caffeine. As I like to say, I'm naturally caffeinated. But I will do like the occasional cup of coffee. Maybe a cup of coffee in the morning, evening. Maybe I used to do chai tea. Now it's like I've been playing around with it, doing like electrolyte water. So I look at this and I think valuation isn't crazy cheap, but it arguably is in a zone of reasonable for very solid execution. If there's any sort of funny business, with sales where they misreport something, I so far haven't seen that. That said, there are always these like lawsuits going on with it that is worthwhile for investors to do their research into. Or if they're just, the execution doesn't show up, where, they don't deliver continued strong growth. So far, that's not the case. If they deliver on those aspects, strong growth, solid fundamentals, real free cash flow, then the stock has the potential to work out really well. And that's the reason why I own a stake. And plus, I like stories. I like situations that have proven themselves. And arguably over the last 5 to 10 years, management, even though it doesn't really strike me as like, this is the CEO of this company, like I didn't, a little surprising to me, but hey, that's so far so good. Got to give credit where credit's due. And so far I'm impressed. So we'll see what happens. If you have a different take on Celsius, once again, this is not like, I'm not trying to endorse it. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm all in, but I'm trying to provide a framework for why the stock dropped today, my thoughts on the current valuation, and why I personally own a stake in Celsius. So I hope you got a takeaway for all those 3 key points, in terms of this video. If this video has been helpful for you, please make a point of hitting that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. If you have a different take, whether or not you strongly dislike Celsius or you think it's the next best thing, feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks so much for tuning in.